Welcome back, everybody. It's Andy coming to you live from Nashville. My buddy Mark is live from
Hungerford, England.
Hungerford,
Doesn't sound
England.
quite as cool as Nashville, to be honest, does it?
Yeah, but as you were just telling me, you're just right down the pike from Downton Abbey.
I am. Yeah, it's 10, 15-minute drive away. Very nice.
Oh,
Very posh.
you British. You've got it made over there.
We've got a little bit of history
So,
over here.
so Mark, today we're going to start our series where we're going to do a little bit of the history of Ian Fleming and Bond, because as people know, if you're watching the show, you pay attention to us. This is all new for me. I'm just starting this crazy adventure. So, and I'm fascinated. So we're going to go back and
53
Mark.
years old you are, and you've never seen a Bond film. I still find that quite extraordinary.
Well, I finally have seen. I saw Doctor No and I enjoyed it, and I have, as I was telling you earlier, I just finished the book of From Russia with Love, which the book was fantastic. And I'll say this to anybody who's listening or paying attention and is like me, doesn't know anything about Ian Fleming. The man is a damn good writer, and if you have not read his books, I urge you to pick up a book and read, or do the audiobook like I did. I was doing it while I was driving back and forth to Cincinnati.
They say write what you know, and Bond is all about. I've said this before. Bond is Fleming's wartime exploits: the people, the characters, the missions, all the espionage, and that's
it's
a very brief stroll through Ian Fleming's life. Will show you that. Yeah.
well. So let's get right down to it, Mark. Let's talk about Ian Fleming himself. What do you know? What can you tell us about the man himself? Because I've started digging into his history, and it's fascinating.
He's born at the turn of the century. When was it? 1910, 1908?
1908, according to the
1908. That's right. And he's born into quite a wealthy English family. I think he was born in Mayfair in London, which is a very, very top end part of London. His father was an MP, member of Parliament. He was a member of Parliament for Henley, which again is a very posh part of town.
So where is Henley?
Henley is where the boat show goes on.
Is it part of London?
Part of London, yeah. It's very nice. Lots of water. It's very, very, very attractive place. His dad's name was Valentine. I can't remember his mum's name, but he was an MP, and then he was killed in the First World War. And Fleming, came from a very wealthy family with connections to a Scottish banking company. I think his grandfather was a Scotsman called Robert Fleming, and he was involved in banking. So there was a lot of family money involved.
So then he goes. Fleming goes off to. Well, he had a brother too, right?
Yeah, he did. Peter, I think he became an author. And when Ian Fleming was trying to get Casino Royale published, I think his brother stepped in and helped him, got us some contacts or something.
So
another brother.
His brother was an older brother, and he had, from what I dug up, was like a travel writer.
Yeah,
he would write about his adventures.
That's right.
Which
Fleming did.
How do you get a job like that?
A little bit of that later in life. He ended up working for Kemsley newspapers, were owned by the Sunday Times, but that's later in his life. He went to prep school in Dorset, which is a nice part of England, and then he ended up at Eton. And in James Bond's backstory, Bond went to Eton as well. So you can see it's all similarities between his life and it's quite. I think I had a quick look this morning. Apparently, Ian Fleming's housemaster at Eton really didn't like him because of his lifestyle, the women, the car, the hair oil, and his general attitude. Apparently, he didn't like him.
So wait, I've looked at pictures of Ian. Was he considered a relatively handsome man?
He's a good-looking guy. Yeah. Good-looking guy.
I'm looking with his hair right now,
flicked back, and his cigarette in a long holder. I think he used to smoke his cigarettes in a long sort of holder, very sort of elegant.
Which I was surprised Bond didn't pick up that. But now, speaking of the smoking,
Bond gets his cigarettes from the same. He had his handmade cigarettes from Moorlands of Grosvenor Square or something like that. The same place that Fleming gets his.
So I was reading about that. So he would get his own blend, right, of tobacco.
Balkan and Turkish tobacco, I believe, made by Moorlands of Grosvenor Square. I think they're called.
And are they still around?
They're still around. Yeah, they're still around. And I think he had, because he was a commander. And again, it's the same thing with Bond. If you're in the Royal Navy, on your sleeves, on your uniform, if you're a commander, I think you've got 3 rings, and he's got 3 gold rings around these handmade cigarettes.
I
So,
mean, what a life. He has
yeah,
custom-made cigarettes.
custom-made smokes, all the fine wine, all the beautiful women. Drives a Bentley. What's not to like?
God, I wanna be Bond.
Yeah, don't we all?
And it said, you probably can correct me, I was looking it up regarding the smoking, and we won't hover too much on that, but, uh, Fleming smoked up to, like, 80 cigarettes a day, is that the
Yeah,
correct
he was
number?
constantly chain smoking, constantly
That
smoking.
is an insane amount of cigarettes.
That's a lot of and this Turkish and Balkan tobacco, it's very strong. It's very strong.
Have you ever partaken in the
In
blend?
Turkish or Balkan tobacco, Andrew? No, I'm denying that completely. It wasn't me. I wasn't there.
You kinda like that, American Indian blend you got
Yeah, that's lovely stuff. That's like
in,
smoking a cardboard box. We like that.
what is that stuff you got here in town? And you're
American
like,
spirit.
this is awful."
It was awful tobacco. Not that
Just
I'm
left it
recommending smoking
you left it in my car, you're like, "Should I quit before I smoke that stuff?"
next to a half-eaten banana. But yeah, no, he used to smoke a lot. And I mean, that's eventually, if we fast forward into the future, that's what killed him because he was only 56, I think, when he died. He had a heart attack because he'd been
Yeah.
smoking and drinking and all his entire life. So,
So we move on, he goes to college,
yeah,
he
goes to
comes
Eton.
he comes out of school, and his plan is what? Do we know? Does he wanna be a
I
journalist, or
think
does he
I
want
think
to go
the
into the military?
I think he tried to get into the Foreign Office, the English government, and I think he passed the test to get in, but they didn't offer him the job, something like that. He went off to Austria to learn to ski and to get ready for this job at the Foreign Office, but it didn't come together at the end. Um, so then he got a job at Reuters, the news agency. He was a journalist, and I
Okay.
think that was the early 30s. He ended up. I know there was a story about him ending up in Moscow covering a something in Moscow, and he tried to get an interview with Stalin and actually got a handwritten message back from Stalin politely declining the offer of an interview or something. So he was quite, very active man in the 30s, Bolshevik Revolution, communists in Russia, rise of the Nazis. He was involved in all of that, reporting on it all over Europe and the rest of the world. Very well travelled man. And again, Bond, well travelled man, all these adventures all over the world. It's all from the mind of Ian Fleming.
Yeah. And from one of the notes I had read somewhere was that a lot of his, um, enemies or villains in his story are Russian, Balkan,
Yeah.
you know, that era, or that geographical area, I'm sorry.
Because I mean, the war was what he got involved with the war in 1939. He joined naval intelligence, and that ended in 45. And then in 46, he went to work for the Sunday Times. So yeah, and then of course you're into the Cold War and all
Yes.
those sort of all that sort of villainy. So that's the genesis of Bond, his wartime exploits and what was going on in the world in the late 40s, early 50s. Because Casino Royale came out when 53, I think. Yeah.
53, I believe, yeah, and so then how does he get the job? When does he end up working for the Rear Admiral, Godfrey?
That's in 39 when war breaks out. He went and joined. He was that's John Godfrey that we were talking about the last time. He's the prototype for M, but he ended up being his personal assistant. Rear Admiral John Godfrey was the head of English naval intelligence in the war, and Fleming became his assistant basically. And there was a memo. What was it called? As the war began, there was a memo came out from naval intelligence, which apparently was written by Fleming. And it came up with all these plans about how they ended up calling it the Trout memo because it likened using espionage and the war against Germany as fly fishing. So you're trying
Yeah,
to
trout
lure,
fishing.
you're trying to lure people into your plots and your plans. There was a thing in the war called Operation Mincemeat, and it was a plan where they got England got a dead body, dressed it up as a British airman, attached a briefcase to it with lots of false documents, and then dropped it off the French coast. And then the German authorities picked it up, thinking it was a crashed English airman,
Yeah.
took it ashore, and then found all these documents. It was all misdirection about D-Day and stuff like that. And apparently Fleming had a hand in
Oh,
starting that. There was a movie about it. It's quite a famous story. Operation Mincemeat is called.
I mean, it's
There
it's
was-
it's quite brilliant if you think about it.
Yeah, there
I
was
mean,
another one
sorry
called
for the dead body and the family of the dead man, but
but the ingenuity behind it, and it worked. They did it. They pulled it off.
well,
You
absolutely,
like,
because it makes sense.
yeah. There was
You
another
find
one
a
called Operation. I like the name of this, Operation Ruthless, and it was a plan to
yeah,
get hold of a Luftwaffe German aeroplane and fly it across the English Channel, but crash it and have an English crew on board, German speaking but English crew on board in this crash plane. And of course, Germany would set France would send over a boat to pick up the crash plane, thinking it was a German's plane. The English spies who were masquerading as the airmen would take over the boat that was sent to rescue them and then take it back to England and have all the Enigma codes and everything on it. And that
oh
was
my god,
apparently from the brain of Ian Fleming. Very
that's just
clever stuff.
brilliant.
Yeah.
That I mean, it kind of. I don't want to get off on From Russia with Love, but since I just read the book, it kind of lends to the Spectre
Yeah.
device that the whole gist of From Russia with Love is to get this coding
The
machine.
Lecter machine is the Enigma machine from the war, basically. You
Yeah,
can
it's
see
basically
where
the
the
Enigma.
parallels.
Yeah,
Yeah, you can see where the parallels. It's all his experiences from the war. And there was
it's
a
just
character, I think I've mentioned it to you before, called Sidney Riley, who was an English spy in the early 20s when the Bolshevik Revolution took place in Russia. And I think he was Russian born, but he was an English spy, and he was very well known. There was a book published about him called Memoirs of a Secret Agent, and he disappeared in Russia, but somebody who knew him and was involved with his adventures published this book, which was a huge bestseller. And I think Fleming is quoted as saying that James Bond was just some nonsense that he dreamt up. He wasn't a Sidney Riley. So he's pulling inspiration from all these real life figures for James Bond. Sidney Riley. There was a TV show in England called in 1983 called Riley, Ace of Spies. They dramatized it, and that Australian guy, the guy that was in Jurassic Park, Sam Neill, played
oh yes, yes.
played Sidney Riley, and it was the same time. 83 was when Octopussy came out, and Roger Moore was talking about not being Bond again, and so they were screen testing other people because he was so good in Riley, Ace of Spies. Sam Neill got an audition for it. He didn't get it. I think he turned it. He wasn't interested. But the Riley Ace of Spies angle, because he was so popular at the time, they had him into audition for Bond. Apparently, that's why.
That is something I never knew that. And we'll probably have to do an episode later on in the show about all the people that could have been Bond
Could have been Bond. That's a very long list. Yeah.
or that auditioned and just didn't quite cut it. And it's
Yeah.
funny to try to think about them now. Like, could I see Sam Neill as Bond? I guess I could.
I think there is a clip of him doing his audition on YouTube somewhere, but he just doesn't. Yeah, it didn't.
Oh yeah, YouTube's.
But at the time, he was very popular because of this Riley Ace of Spies thing, and that's a
Well,
true
so
story.
let's jump up one thing real quick while we're talking about it. Is the name James Bond? You could tell the story, but I was fascinated when I found out where he got the name from because I thought, wow, what a brilliant name, Bond, James Bond. It's so
Well,
iconic.
apparently, he was looking for a really dull, boring, flat name that wouldn't really stand out. And
Yeah,
he had a house in Jamaica called Goldeneye, which is another story all in itself. And one of the books he had there, I think it was called Birds of the West Indies. It's called, and it was written, and it's an ornithologist. Or I can't pronounce it.
yeah,
Ornithologist.
that sounds right.
Yeah, that's about right. All about watching birds and birds of the West Indies, and it's written by a guy called James Bond. And he apparently saw the name when he was trying to think of a name for his character, and he thought it was the dullest, most boring name he'd ever heard, and it was perfect. So that's the story behind the name, apparently. And he was a real guy.
Yeah, it really is perfect as a
Yeah,
name. Like I
nice,
can't.
flat, simple name. Yeah,
And granted, it is it's ingrained. It's in our what do they call it? The zeitgeist, as people
yeah,
say. The name James Bond. I mean, it's iconic. But he looked at it as boring.
yeah.
And
He's a
I'm
spy. He's having all these wonderful, exciting things happen to him. But there's no, he can't be a spy if his name stands out. Nothing about a secret agent is supposed to stand out, is it? I mean, really, in real life,
yeah.
someone who's carrying on like James Bond in his suits and his Aston Martins, they wouldn't last very long, I'd imagine. But
No.
they need to. James Bond is apparently a dull, flat, boring name, and it was perfect. That's
Apparently. But I wonder if the guy, the actual James Bond, ever was
I
he
think he
probably
met Fleming. I think they corresponded. If they didn't meet, I know they certainly wrote letters to each other. I think they did.
God,
After Bond was published and it became a success and the story came out, I think they did get in touch with each other.
you'd have to, right?
Yeah, totally. Imagine that. Imagine waking up and your name is the inspiration for a
One of
hugely famous literary character.
the greatest literary spy of all time.
Yeah, of all time. Yeah, great. But that's where the name comes from, apparently.
I thought that was super, just interesting, fascinating. That you think he spent all this time thinking of this perfect name. It's like, no, he just looked at a book that was sitting on his desk, and the guy's name, it was a bird.
Sometimes it's the simplest things that work the best.
It's interesting.
Apparently what the genesis of the name.
To slightly digress, but staying on topic of the names, I love a series of books over here called Jack Reacher books.
Oh yeah,
Lee Child is the author. Jack Reacher, he's another Brit. Lee Child is, and this name Jack Reacher, which is just so, it's like, God, this macho, former military policeman, and I read an interview with him where someone asked him where he came up with the name Jack Reacher, and he said he was at a grocery store. And Lee Child himself is a tall man. He's like 6'5", 6'7". And there was a shorter lady trying to reach something on the top shelf. She couldn't get it. So he reached up and got it for her. And she said, I don't know what you do for a living, but you could be a professional reacher.
Oh, okay. Nice.
And it just hit him. He goes, that's the name. Now, to me, I wouldn't have thought of that. Sounds like a stupid word. But now I can't imagine that character as any other name. Jack Reacher is he's an iconic badass in the literary world, if you ever want to read some good books.
For some reason, it just works. Isn't Tom Cruise 5'6" and Jack Reacher's?
Yeah, no, I could go off on that.
That's a whole other story, isn't it? Yeah, all right.
Yeah, this has been Book Talk with Andy and Mark.
Yeah.
But yeah, so anyway, names is something that's interesting when you think about that stuff. But so let me ask. Let's go back to Mr. Fleming himself. So he did was he doing the military before he was the journalist, right? The timeline.
No, he was in the war broke out in 1939. He was working for Reuters in the early 1930s. And then the war broke out. Then he joined Naval Intelligence. And then when the war finished in 1946, he joined Kemsley newspapers as their foreign editor or foreign manager. And they were owned by the Sunday Times. And that's when he went off and did. There's another book that isn't Bond. It's called Thrilling Cities. And it's all about his travels around the world, New York, Hong Kong, Honolulu, places like that, and he wrote it all down for the Sunday Times. So that's quite an interesting book if you wanted to read something by Fleming that isn't Bond. Thrilling.
Well, I'm interested in that. And then, have you read any of his brother's books?
No, I haven't.
I mean, what did he write books? Was he just a journalist who wrote about travel?
I think he wrote books as well. My history with his brother is a bit vague, but I know he was a journalist first because when Fleming was trying to get Casino Royale published, I think his name is Robert. Peter Fleming.
Peter Fleming.
Yeah, got him some.
Who outlived his brother quite significantly.
That's right, yeah.
So then my question, and you may not really know this, but I'll throw it out there if you do. Great. How did he go? Like, was he in the military? How did he become the assistant or whatever you call it, personal assistant to the Rear Admiral? Was he just a citizen?
No, I think he'd applied to join the Foreign Office, and because of his family background, I think there were contacts involved. Favors might have been called in. I don't know this story about how he got in there, but I know he ended up being this personal assistant to Godfrey, and it was after that it was all.
Yeah, because I can't imagine, like today, especially over here in America, our military, if some high-ranking admiral or general needed an assistant, that he would just go, just give me this journalist. He seems like a good chap. It would be a military guy. They would just bring somebody up in the ranks.
I think it was family background. Somebody knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody else, and he got in that way. I think. I'm not entirely genned up on how all that happened, but he was suddenly very, in the thick of it, very influential. Some of the things that Fleming came up with have become, legendary beyond the
now.
world.
In the notes that you sent me, I'm looking at them here. We touched briefly on his involvement in some of these missions. You sent me a note that says he was involved in planning Operation Goldeneye, and
Right.
oversight of 2 intelligent units, the 30 Assault Unit and the T-Force.
Yeah, there was the GoldenEye was the name of a secret mission that was about if Nazi Germany managed to overrun Spain, it was all about setting up a spy network in Spain to help, report on what was going on and disrupt things and stuff like that. GoldenEye was the title for that mission or that operation. And then years later, when he decided to buy a house in Jamaica, he called it GoldenEye.
Yeah, I would say that's got a through line.
Yeah, that's where
Uh,
that comes from.
and I know that movie's a little bit ways out for me, but is the movie does it have
GoldenEye,
anything
that was on TV here in the UK on Friday night.
is
I
it
caught the end of it.
I don't know, is it tie into, this mission, the
No,
Spain and all that?
they just use the name. It's a
Just
good
use the
name.
name.
Nice name.
Yeah, it's a good name. If I had a mansion, I would like to name it something, but I wouldn't be that clever.
No, it's a good name. But that again, all his wartime exploits run all the way through his life. GoldenEye was all about setting up a spy network in Spain if the Germans ran it.
And, you wonder as, somebody who just, an average person just here reading these books, and we know it's based a lot on his real life, but, how much of the spy stuff was it seems fantastical to us, but was this really the way things worked? I wonder. I'd love to be able to talk to a real spy and ask him
Wow.
how I know you can't give us details, but is this intricacy and all this? I mean, again, just coming off of reading Dr. No, his briefcase gets introduced in this book
All right, yeah.
that has all these weapons hidden in it. And there's a fantastic fight scene in the cabin on a train. And I'm sure I'm not spoiling anything for anybody because the book's only 60 years old. But
The fight scene in the movie is tremendous. It's one of the best.
I look forward to seeing it.
It's one of the
hope
best Bond fight scenes ever. It's great.
I look forward to the great thing is, as I'm reading the book, I see Connery. And I'm just like, oh, yeah, this is going to be so great. I cannot wait to watch the movie.
Yeah, it's a great film.
I look forward to it. And I truly enjoyed the book. And we've talked before, and I will mention it here because you just held up another book of his that's out. Besides writing the Bond, he also wrote a famous children's book.
Yeah, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Yeah,
Chitty
the flying
Chitty
car.
Bang Bang.
Yeah.
Which
if you're of a certain age, like I am, Chitty Chitty
yes.
Bang Bang was one of the big movies when I was
It was, and fascinatingly enough, where's my notes at here? Let me find
the
something.
child catcher in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang still scares me now. I can see him in my head. Yeah, it was quite frightening when you were 8, 9.
So here it is. Okay, I had this note that I made. So as I put on my notes, well, let's see. Let me find where I went. So Ian Fleming, born in 1908, Ian Lancaster Fleming, wealthy family, blah blah blah. His father Henley, Parliament for Henley, constituency of Oxfordshire. Wrote his first novel in 1952 at age 44, Casino Royale. I like this. He showed the book to an old girlfriend who suggested he not publish it, and if he did, he should publish under a pseudonym.
Oh, really?
Can you imagine that? But
how wrong can you be?
Oh my God! Well, again, another off side rail here, a tangent. To quote a friend of mine who runs a podcast called Tangent Station, a tangent. Stephen King, who the world knows as the master of horror, his first novel, Carrie, he had written it, and when he finished it, he threw it in the garbage. He didn't think it was a good book. And his wife, Tabitha, picked it up. She goes, "What's with this?" And he goes, "I don't know. I don't think it's good." Because it's all about a young girl and it's telekinesis and stuff like that. And he just said, he goes, "I don't know how to write female characters. I'm a guy. I don't know how to do this." He goes, "I just think this is rubbish." He threw it in the garbage, and she picked it up and she read it. She goes, "This is great. And if you have questions about being a girl, I'm right here. I'm a girl. I'll help you." So she pushed him to send it off. And of course, that was his first book that he sold. And again, not believing in himself. And this young lady did not believe in a young Ian Fleming. But so he went on to write 12 Bond novels and 2 short story collections, as well as the children's book Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, written for his son Casper.
That's right.
And this was later adapted for the screen by another wildly famous author. Do you know who it was?
It
Who
was Roald
adapted
Dahl.
it? Roald
Roald
Dahl,
Dahl?
yeah.
That's right. And
Of
Roald
Will
Dahl helped write the script for You Only Live Twice when they
Oh,
turned
did
it
he?
into. Yeah, yeah. But we'll
Oh,
get to that
nice.
later when you finally catch up, Andy.
I got some watching to do.
You've got some work to do, yeah.
But like you said, people of a certain age, which you and I are, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, which is the television version, the movie version is a musical with
Dick Van Dyke.
Dick Van Dyke.
Mm.
And you see that, and then you see James Bond, and you think, how is this written by the same person? And I mean, I haven't read the book, so maybe the book is not as cheery and songy, if that's a word.
I've never read Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. I've never picked it up.
I will endeavor once I finish the Bond novels. I will, and I found it interesting that we'll delve into this books a little more, but I want to touch on, besides my notes here, I want to touch my notes real quick before we wrap this thing up. This first episode of this. So I read a note that says smoking. We'll touch back on his smoking just for a moment because I find it fascinating. Bond is a heavy smoker. According to, I guess, historians, Bond smoked about 70 cigarettes a day.
Yeah,
custom made by Moreland.
Same as Fleming.
Yeah, the Balkan Turkish tobacco having higher nicotine content than normal, is what my notes say. They have the gold bands on the filter. Bond carried his cigarettes in a wide gunmetal cigarette case, which carried 50, which that plays an important role in From Russia with Love.
Doesn't it save his life? Does it catch a bullet?
Saved his life.
That's it.
Which, again, very smart thinking, because in the book, it's a subtlety that he takes a cigarette case out. And I guess what's fascinating is you read these books, and we all would like to think we could be so cool under pressure, and I would not be. I don't think most people would be that calm under pressure.
No,
assuming that he's trained. And I know it's a book, and I know it's a story, and I understand that. But he just casually pulls a cigarette case out. The idiot that says, "Sure, have a cigarette," and Bond keeps it there, and then he hides it in a book, knowing full well that this guy's going to try to shoot me at some point in time. But I like the detail. So he talks about the gunmetal cigarette case. Then he says he also used a black oxidized Ronson lighter.
Yeah.
Then he talks about the cigarettes are the same as Fleming's, who had been buying his Moreland since 1930s. The 3 gold bands on the filter were added during the war to mirror his naval commander's rank.
I think he got 500 a week delivered or something. I mean, that's a lot of cigarettes.
Yeah, because you do smoke a little from time to time, and
from time to time when I'm under stress, yes.
That has
I've had moments where I've been a heavy smoker, but to smoke 70 cigarettes a day, that's
a day.
Yeah, a day.
I mean, if you do the math, and again, we live in a world now where, we're all familiar with the dangers of smoking and all that. I understand that. And I'm not here to advocate anything. I don't care. I find it fascinating because if you think about anything that you enjoy, like I enjoy donuts. I couldn't eat that many donuts in a day. I would vomit.
Yeah.
And I couldn't necessarily do it day after day. And you do the math on
heroic smoker by anyone's standard. Heroic smoker. But then it killed him in the end.
I'm going to quote you on that, Mark. Heroic smoker. But you think about if you break down how long you're awake during the day, then how many cigarettes per hour. It's an effort. It's a colossal effort. And I applaud you, Mr.
You're
Fleming.
stubbing one out and you're lighting another one, basically, aren't you?
And would they have filters?
I think the ones that Fleming ordered didn't have filter. I think they're unfiltered cigarettes.
He's just like, I'm fucking going for it.
Yeah, just straightforward, suck it on down, baby. Yeah,
I love it. Well, Mark, I tell you, let's wrap this episode up on the smoking. So if you're a smoker,
don't start, Andy. Don't start.
Yeah, don't start if you haven't. But if you do, light one up for Mr. Bond, James Bond.
James Bond.
So with that, everybody, I say goodbye, and I say to you, my friend, keep bonding.
I sure will, Andrew. Take care.